When empires collapse, the first signs are never riots or revolutions, but balance sheets that no longer balance. History shows that financial failure always arrives before political failure. In 1913, Britain controlled nearly a quarter of the world's economic output while quietly accumulating unprecedented war debt. Confidence was absolute, even as the foundation was already weakening. In the 3rd century, Rome expanded its territory while reducing the silver content of its coins. Prosperity was visible everywhere, but the currency was already being hollowed out. In 1971, the United States ended the convertibility of the dollar into gold after foreign claims exceeded available reserves. The world celebrated flexibility, but the anchor of the system was removed. Every great power reaches a moment when promises exceed production. That moment never looks like crisis while it is happening. Debt grows quietly because it solves problems without immediate pain. Money creation works because its consequences are delayed. Inflation begins as a policy tool and ends as a social force. Currency stress always follows when discipline disappears. History does not repeat events, but it repeats financial structures. The sequence is always slow, then sudden. What destroys empires is not invasion, but arithmetic. Numbers eventually override power. If every empire dies the same way, the only real question is timing, and timing is always determined by debt. Sovereign debt begins as a temporary tool to survive emergencies. It becomes permanent when governments discover it is easier than raising taxes. Borrowing grows fastest when economies slow, because political systems protect spending before productivity. Over time, debt expands faster than the income used to repay it. Central banks exist to stabilize currency, but they are soon asked to stabilize governments instead. Independence erodes when fiscal needs become urgent. Interest rates are lowered to make rising debt affordable. Cheaper credit delays default but encourages even more borrowing. When rates reach zero, money creation replaces savings as the engine of growth. At that point, expansion no longer reflects real productivity. Every fiat currency begins with discipline and ends with convenience. Convertibility is abandoned not by accident, but by necessity. Credit expansion distorts prices before it distorts behavior. Asset values rise faster than wages because money enters finance first. Productive investment slowly gives way to speculative preservation of wealth. The economy shifts from building capacity to protecting balance sheets. Inflation does not start with shortages, but with excess claims on future output. Too much money chases too few real gains. Governments then suppress rates below inflation to reduce the real value of debt. Savers pay the cost while borrowers are protected. This policy is called financial repression in economic history. It appears in every late-stage empire. Foreign creditors tolerate it only while confidence remains intact. Once trust weakens, capital begins to move. Reserve currencies delay this process by exporting inflation abroad. But delay always increases the eventual scale of adjustment. The mechanism is mechanical, not moral. Arithmetic governs outcomes regardless of intentions. Debt is never the cause of collapse by itself. Collapse begins when confidence can no longer carry the numbers. In 211 AD, Emperor Caracalla reduced the silver content of the Roman denarius to fund military expansion. The empire gained soldiers immediately, but lost monetary integrity permanently. By 250 AD, Rome's coinage contained less than 50% silver. Prices rose not because goods were scarce, but because money was weaker. Tax revenues failed to keep pace with military spending, and the state responded by creating more currency rather than reducing obligations. Merchants adjusted prices upward to protect themselves from debasement. Ordinary citizens discovered that wages lagged behind costs. By the 4th century, barter replaced coin in many provinces. Trust in imperial money had evaporated. The Western Roman Empire did not fall in a single year. It dissolved financially decades before it collapsed politically. In 1914, Britain entered World War I with the world's strongest currency and deepest capital markets. By 1918, its national debt exceeded 140% of GDP. Gold convertibility was suspended to finance war expenditures. Paper claims replaced metal reserves. In 1925, Britain returned to gold at the pre-war rate. The decision overvalued sterling and damaged exports. Unemployment remained above 10% throughout the 1920s. Debt service consumed resources needed for recovery. In 1931, Britain abandoned the gold standard under pressure from capital flight. The pound fell sharply in foreign exchange markets. The empire survived militarily but declined financially. Leadership shifted not by conquest but by exhaustion. In 1919, Germany emerged from war with reparations beyond its fiscal capacity. The state chose money creation over taxation. Between 1921 and 1923, the German money supply increased more than 1 trillion%. Prices doubled every few days. In January 1923, a loaf of bread cost 250 marks. By November, it cost 200 billion marks. Savings accumulated over lifetimes were erased in months. Social trust collapsed before political order did. The government stabilized the currency only after abandoning the old mark entirely. A new unit replaced a destroyed system. These collapses were not caused by panic. They were caused by policies chosen under constraint. War created the debt. Debt forced monetary expansion. Monetary expansion destroyed currency value. The sequence never changed across centuries. Only the scale and speed differed. In 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement made the US dollar the center of the global monetary system. Gold convertibility limited how much debt the system could absorb. For 25 years, the dollar remained anchored to gold at $35 per ounce. Trade expanded because money was restrained by reserves. By the late 1960s, US war spending and social programs exceeded gold holdings. Foreign central banks began demanding metal instead of paper. In August 1971, President Nixon ended dollar convertibility into gold. The last external discipline on US monetary policy disappeared. Public debt was less than 40% of GDP at that moment. The expansion had only begun. In 1981, US federal debt crossed $1 trillion for the first time. Deficits became structural rather than cyclical. After 2001, war and tax reductions widened borrowing permanently. Debt rose faster than economic growth. In 2008, the global banking system froze under excessive leverage. Central banks responded with near zero interest rates. The Federal Reserve expanded its balance sheet from under $1 trillion to over $4 trillion by 2014. Money creation replaced market discipline. Cheap credit stabilized banks but inflated asset prices. Productivity did not rise at the same pace. In 2020, governments launched the largest fiscal expansion in history. U.S. deficits exceeded $3 trillion in a single year. The money supply increased more than 40% in 24 months. Inflation followed with a delay. By 2022, consumer prices rose more than 9% annually. Interest rates had to rise rapidly to contain it. Higher rates increased the cost of servicing existing debt. Policy became trapped between inflation and insolvency. By 2023, U.S. federal debt exceeded $33 trillion. Interest costs became one of the largest budget items. Foreign central banks reduced their share of dollar reserves. Diversification replaced concentration. Gold purchases by central banks reached their highest level since 1967. Reserve managers quietly sought insurance. Alternative payment systems expanded outside the dollar network. Trade slowly fragmented by currency. None of this occurred suddenly. Each step followed logically from the last. Inflation is the first visible consequence of excessive debt. It reduces purchasing power without requiring legislation. Savings lose value faster than wages can adjust. The burden shifts silently to households. Negative real interest rates become a policy choice. They allow debts to shrink in real terms. Banks are encouraged to hold government bonds instead of productive loans. Credit is redirected toward financing the state. Capital controls appear when money begins to leave. Regulation replaces persuasion. Currencies rarely collapse in a straight line. They lose value slowly, then rapidly. Reserve currencies decline later than others, but when they adjust, the impact is global. Defaults are avoided because they are visible. Inflation is chosen because it is gradual. Empires do not fall when armies are defeated. They fall when obligations exceed capacity. Power is measured not only by territory, but by credibility. Credibility is stored in currency. Every empire believes its system is unique. Every empire is wrong. Rome trusted debasement. Britain trusted restoration. Germany trusted printing. The United States trusts liquidity. The mechanism is unchanged. Collapse is not an event. It is a process of adjustment. The true signal is not recession. The signal is permanent imbalance. When borrowing becomes policy, decline becomes structural. Growth becomes accounting. Empires do not die from enemies. They die from internal arithmetic. The final mistake is believing this time is different. It never is. Every empire dies the same way. The only variable is how long it takes. The present does not guarantee collapse. It guarantees a choice. Adjustment can be slow or sudden. Both are painful. The future will not be decided by ideology. It will be decided by numbers. Debt sets the limits of power. Money reveals them. The end does not come with noise. It comes with normalization. History does not warn loudly. It whispers through data. Every empire dies the same way. We are only watching where we are in the sequence.